So we've just had the new Apple WWDC 2019 event, and there's loads of new updates for you creators, including an all-new Mac Pro and a new monitor, but we'll get into those in a bit. First of all, I want to go over some of the new things in iOS, iPad and Mac OS. So for the iPhone, there's not a huge amount of updates, but the first things that caught my eye was the new dark mode. This new dark mode is system-wide, which enables iOS both on the iPhone and the iPad to have this new dark mode throughout the entire system, and that not only looks quite cool, but it also saves battery life, especially if you've got one of those new iPhone X OLED screens. Also new in iOS is the new photo and video editing capabilities. So you've always been able to edit photos in iOS on the iPhone, but now they've added some extra features to make it a little bit more like Snapseed if you've edited within that app before. But now within video, you can actually now rotate, crop and color correct video directly within the Photos app, which is pretty cool. Now, if we go to the iPad, there's some new features which I think creators will really like. So the iPad's always been a bit of a sticking point for me because on one hand, they're trying to sell it as a pro device, but on the other hand, it's still quite limited on what you can do. But they've made some subtle changes which I think will help. So the first change is an update to slide over. Before, you could just have one slide over app and you could change it manually by dragging a new app in its place. But what you can do now is you can actually rotate the apps around. So you could say have Twitter, iMessage and Spotify or Apple Music running on the side, which I think is much better for multitasking. The second advancement is the ability to run the same app twice. So the problem I've had in the past, when I write scripts for these videos or I'm working on something for editor's keys, the problem we have if you're using Microsoft Word is that you may be writing a document and then you want to reference a previous script or document that you may have already written. And the only way you could do that was by closing the app down and then kind of reopening it, copying and pasting into your new document. Well, now you can actually run two versions of Word or Notes or Photos, whatever app you want to use, and have them side by side. So it makes it a bit more like Mac OS or Windows, which I think is a really cool update. But one thing we were calling for last year when we reviewed the iPad Pro, which if you haven't seen that review, you can watch that by clicking the link up here or below the video, was the ability to actually connect an external drive and get files from an external SSD drive. You've always been able to import from an SD card, but instead of having to plug in your SD card, get those photos imported into the Photos app and then drag them across to something like Lightroom, you can now plug in your SD card and you can import those photos directly into apps like Lightroom, which I think is much needed. It's something that's really annoyed me in the past because you would just fill up your camera roll full of extra videos and photos that you may only want for work. You know, you don't necessarily want them in your sort of personal space of your iPad. So I think having that feature is really cool. They've also updated the Files app so it looks much more like something you'd see on Mac or Windows. So you get kind of metadata, you get previews of the files within the Files app. So I think that's a really cool feature. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And then the final addition I really like is an updated version of Safari. So of course we've always had Safari on iPhone and iPad, but it's always been the kind of watered down iOS version. Well, now they've got a full desktop version of Safari coming, so you can run more complicated web apps like Gmail, Google Docs directly within Safari. Before you had to use a janky app, or if you loaded it up within Safari, it just wouldn't load properly and you had problems scrolling. So hopefully this new version of Safari will help all of you people who maybe have Shopify websites or WordPress websites, because now you'll be able to use Safari and edit those sites. So now if we move over to Mac OS, there's a couple of new features for that which I think are really going to help you. The first one is great if you have an iPad. It's called Sidecar and it enables you to use your iPad as a second screen to something like an iMac or a MacBook Pro. But in addition to this, if you're running programs like Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, you can now use that iPad as a second screen and then use it a bit like a Wacom device. So you can use your Apple Pencil, you can draw and use it like you would on an iPad, but it correlates and connects to Illustrator in the Mac OS version, which I think is really cool. And I think a lot of pro users are gonna love that feature. Next is they have this new system which allows iPad apps to come to the Mac for the first time. I think we're going to see how this one goes. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing that they're kind of converging these two systems? Essentially what it enables Mac to do is, if a developer has an iPad app, so you could use maybe something like Instagram or the Twitter app if you want to go that basic, you can bring that over to the Mac and run these iPad apps just like their Mac apps. What do you think of that? So the news you've all been waiting for, there is now a new Mac Pro. Yes, of course, there was the black trash can Mac Pro, but Apple even admitted themselves that there were quite a lot of problems with this Mac Pro. We had heatsink issues, we had thermal throttling, we had just users screaming out that they couldn't really upgrade it the way that they would like. So this new Mac Pro looks to address these issues, and boy, is it super powerful. It's built from a full stainless steel kind of outer body, then you can just lift off the top, and then inside it can run a 28-core Intel Xeon processor. It's just an absolute monster. In addition to that, if you've got a MacBook Pro or an iMac, you'll know that when you usually look at upgrading the RAM, you might start with 8, 16, 32, and maybe if you're lucky, go up to something like 64 gigabytes of RAM. Well, this new Mac Pro can handle 1.5 terabytes of RAM. That's right, terabytes of RAM, 1.5 terabytes of RAM. I think that's utterly insane, but it's really good to see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how much that costs to install that amount of RAM, but just having that, if you run any intensive apps, any intense photography apps, any intense 3D apps, having that amount of RAM is just gonna help you so much. So it's really good to see that there. There's also 8 PCI Express slots in the Mac Pro, so you can upgrade that as you wish, which I think is going to be really cool to see some of the things that people do with that Mac Pro. Apple have also created a new MPX graphics module, which just allow for an insane amount of graphics power. So when you get the Mac Pro, you can use the Radeon Pro Vega 2 Duo, and this means you can have up to 14 teraflops of compute power, and then 32 gigabytes of memory, and 1 terabyte of memory bandwidth. So pretty cool if you're, say, a video editor or using something like After Effects. So you can have up to 4 graphics cards together, which will give you 56 teraflops and 128 gigabytes of high bandwidth capacity. So I'd love to see how something like Premiere or Final Cut handles that. I think it's going to be insane, and hopefully we'll have one on the channel, so make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'd love to show you what that can do. There's also something called Afterburner that Apple are adding on, and this enables you to use 4K and 8K footage just natively. You don't have to encode it or transcode it, and then when you export you won't get any errors. It should just be able to breeze through 8K footage like it's 720p. So this new Mac Pro, it's absolutely amazing. It's going to start at around $6,000. Now, of course, that's a lot of money, but actually when you compare it to similar spec PCs with very similar graphics and RAM and everything else, it actually comes across as a bit of a bargain. Apple showed on stage that a similar spec PC would cost $8,000. I'm sure some of you could build a PC a little bit cheaper, but actually $6,000 isn't too bad. Now, it doesn't come with a monitor, of course, but what do you think about that price? And what do you think about the design and the look of the new Mac Pro? Leave a comment below. And then there was the new monitor, the Pro Display XDR. Now, Apple have announced this new Pro level monitor, and it seriously is Pro level. It can have a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio. It has 1600 nits of brightness, and it's an absolutely beautiful display. It can even be rotated into portrait mode. Now, the price starts at $6,000, so it's certainly not a kind of consumer level monitor. And when I first saw this price, I thought, oh my word, this is an insane price for a monitor. But when you compare it, if you're in a film studio, and I've been in a few, you do get these Sony monitors. Now they can run at kind of $20,000 to $30,000, and the new Apple display is actually better than those monitors if you look at the tech spec sheet. So if you're coming from that level, if you're coming from a high-end sort of graphic studio or film studio, this new £6,000 monitor is actually going to seem like a bit of a bargain. But if you're kind of a mid-level filmmaker or creator, this is quite a hard pill to swallow, a $6,000 monitor. And it doesn't even come with a stand. The stand is an extra $999. So I don't know what you're going to do if you just buy the monitor. You're going to have it laying on your desk. What do you think about this? Are you excited about this new monitor? I can't wait to get my hands on one and see what it looks like. But I was just hoping that Apple would do maybe a 21-inch or 27-inch kind of replacement for the cinema display, but I know this monitor is going to be great for the top-end pros. But let us know what you think about this year's WWDC. Leave your comments below. Are you going to get a Mac Pro? Are you going to get the new monitor? And are you looking forward to the new updates to iOS? Hope you've enjoyed watching the video, and make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell.